and welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Anastasiya Lavrina. The relations between Azerbaijan and Russia are facing another serious test. This time, Baku is responding to statements in the Russian media that it says have gone far beyond political criticism and crossed into direct threats against Azerbaijan and its national security. Azerbaijan has placed 3 Russian citizens on an international wanted list. They are accused of publicly calling for terrorism, violence and actions directed against the Azerbaijani state. The investigation relates to broadcasts in July and August. For Baku, however, the concern is wider than the statements of 3 individuals. Azerbaijan summoned the Russian ambassador and formally protested what it described as a growing pattern of provocative, threatening and anti-Azerbaijani rhetoric across several Russian media platforms. The message from Baku is clear. Criticism is one thing, but calls for violence or actions against Azerbaijan's sovereignty and constitutional order are another. Moscow has distanced itself from the statements, saying they do not represent Russia's official position towards Azerbaijan. But the controversy comes at a sensitive moment, when relations between the two countries have already been under growing pressure. Tonight on Inside Politics, we examine what is driving the latest tensions between Azerbaijan and Russia and what could come next. Joining me now in the studio is Javid Rahimli, who is an international lawyer. Javid, welcome to Inside Politics.
Thank you for the invitation. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Great to have you in our studio. So, a small introduction. Let me start with between 14th of July and 30th of August, episodes of the broadcast program Clarity of Understanding, hosted by Semyon Uralov alongside state television presenter Ivan Knyazyev and Russian Transport Ministry advisor Alexei Chadayev, feature explicit discussion of military intervention against Baku, forced diaspora mobilization and targeted liquidations, complemented by what is understood as aggressive rhetoric on Radio Sputnik and Spaz TV. Given that systematic messaging of this nature across state-aligned platforms can be interpreted as a form of Moscow-controlled signaling, what strategic calculations, let's say, might explain the emergence of such warnings towards Azerbaijan at this precise moment? Why it's happening now?
To be honest, I'm a lawyer. I'm not the expert in bilateral Russia-Azerbaijan relations, but from my understanding, it is indeed could be characterized as a hybrid diplomacy, where the individuals in question, they are not state officials in a traditional sense, but they are employed by the state-owned media channels. So it might be a method used by Moscow to show some messages to the Azerbaijani government, and especially given the Azerbaijan's improved relations with the United States, their strategic partnership, and after 1 year of the signing of the trilateral statement between Armenia, United States and Azerbaijan, we see that developed relations. Also, recently the deputy foreign minister was in United States, and there were some improvements. It could be a message to the Azerbaijan that it should take some measures regarding their foreign policy shifts. But to be honest, I feel like these methods are not effective because it happened before regarding the Azal airplane incident. Russia was insisting not to compensate, but at the end, Baku made Moscow to agree on Azerbaijan's main demands. And I would say such methods have no positive outcome for the bilateral relations. But again, they are all speculations, given they are not official state representatives. And also Moscow has stated that the private journalist's view does not represent the Moscow's official stance to Baku. So that's kind of a speculation, but it could be a method used by Moscow as a hybrid diplomacy to send some signals.
Well, that's very interesting. You mentioned the visit of the deputy minister to the United States, but we cannot ignore the fact that quite earlier, the Minister of Foreign Affairs himself traveled to Moscow. That was quite a constructive dialogue held with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. Yes, 2 weeks later, he also traveled to Ukraine, but let's say this is a domestic issue of Azerbaijan itself, and it's Azerbaijan who is taking decision which countries to work with together. Again, coming back to what is happening today, what we can see is the rhetoric, the statements made by some journalists on the Russian media platform. Could this be connected with the President Ilham Aliyev's remark, which were made at the platform at the Shusha Global Media Forum held quite recently?
What particular remarks are you mentioning about?
There were some political remarks made by President Aliyev, including the past, the Soviet time, what is happening today, the support of territorial integrity of Ukraine, and probably in Russia there are a number of people and policymakers who are dissatisfied with the statements made in Azerbaijan. But still, could this be one of the reasons why we can hear these statements now?
Maybe, but I would say we need to look these issues in context, because as it is clear from the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Azerbaijan's statement that the previously different political channels were used to say to Russia that they need to take some measures in their media and information platforms regarding that measures. Because of such warnings, no measure was taken by Moscow, and now this situation culminated by the Prosecutor General's criminal investigation. But as you mentioned, the President Aliyev had given political remarks in the Shusha Global Forum. But I believe these issues are not directly relevant, but it could be a factor triggering Moscow not to control their media channels in order to further improve the relations between Baku and Moscow.
We can see the differences, as you rightly pointed out before. These kind of destructive statements made by the journalists and the so-called experts on the media platforms in the Russian Federation, an official statement made by the spokesperson of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. But still, will it be fair to say that this moment reveals a core modus operandi of Russian foreign policy, whereby state-aligned or state-facilitated media platforms are deliberately employed for controlled signaling to, let's say, exert pressure or test the boundaries of neighboring states, whilst official diplomacy retains plausible deniability by characterizing the commentators concerned as private actors?
Actually, yeah, I would say that would be quite a good characteristics of the issues we are discussing, but I would like to highlight that one of the Russian citizens who were charged on the crimes by the Azerbaijan's Prosecutor General is not just a so-called political commentator or journalist. He was actually acting as an advisor to the government minister until very recently, and that shows the plausible deniability might not work regarding that particular individual, because it is not junior government officer, it's a high-level government minister's advisor. And we also just seen after the official response by the Baku, he just resigned. That shows actually it's not just individual journalists showing their own political views. But again, as we all know, in Russian state-owned media channels, probably it's not that easy. Everyone can go and talk whatever they want. Probably there's sometimes some kind of general agreement of main principles, main frames, and probably the Russian government or some people within the Russian government were informed about those individuals giving that remarks prior to their remarks, because it's clear after the remarks were made, they were all aware, because the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Azerbaijan has mentioned that the Russian officials were notified regarding those issues. But despite the fact that they were notified, Baku believes they have not taken good measures to prevent similar remarks by the
because it happens simultaneously, like a number of times it's appeared on the Russian media platforms.
Yeah, and that's the reason.
Not the first and the last case, let's say.
Yeah, that's the reason now we've seen a very harsh legal response by the Baku, and I believe this time it will probably have a significant impact on preventing those remarks, because putting those individuals on international wanted list has some consequences, and I assume journalists will avoid making similar remarks in the future.
Well, but immediately after it was so much broadcasted on a number of media platforms, we could hear a new anti-Azerbaijani rhetoric, which were, let's say, stated by the Russian television presenter Vladimir Solovyov, who just questioned why Moscow has not responded after Azerbaijan placed 3 Russian citizens on an international wanted list. He also referred to the let's say, again, relations between Azerbaijan and Ukraine, pointing it out. It happened after Azerbaijan's decision to put those 3 Russian citizens on the wanted list. So the rhetoric is continued even after the official statement made by the spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So why do you think it's happening? My first question. And second, what should happen to eliminate this negative rhetoric in the Russian media space, if there is any kind of things can be done?
I believe what is ongoing right now will probably have a positive outcome in terms of preventing such negative remarks in the Russian media, because, as you mentioned, despite the fact that Moscow said it does not show the official government position, but still they're in the international wanted list, and that's a procedure under Azerbaijani national law, under Azerbaijani criminal procedure. They were charged with public calls for terrorism. Also, they called against the territorial integrity of the Azerbaijan regarding the military invasion. And also, I haven't actually listened to the remarks because it was deleted on the YouTube after all this recent developments.
It's still available.
Yeah. But because I don't know the Russian fluently, I haven't listened, but I read it from media sources that there are some remarks also against the leadership of Azerbaijan, and also involving some domestic political affairs, which is actually passing the, I would say, the red line for government of Azerbaijan. And now it is under Azerbaijani criminal code. Those remarks are punishable by law. Some might say that's a freedom of speech, that's just political commentary, but the freedom of speech is not an absolute right. It could be restricted, and it's general, I would say, understanding around the world that public remarks inciting violence is punishable, and because those individuals are not present in Azerbaijan and they're not Azerbaijani nationals, the issues around the jurisdiction of Azerbaijan comes. For example, Moscow could say Azerbaijan government does not have the jurisdiction to prosecute Russian citizens who was not in Azerbaijani territory during the commentary. But there is a principle under international law which is called like protective principle. Usually the governments, they prosecute individuals based on the territorial jurisdiction. If the crime is committed on government's territory, it is easily prosecutable, but on some occasions, if the crime is against the state's core interests, such as the national security, territorial integrity of Azerbaijan, using the protective principle of international law, Azerbaijan may prosecute them, and they actually did, and now the pre-trial investigation is ongoing, and judge, I believe, recently just decided pre-trial detention. But it was in absentia, and because it was in absentia, now it is delayed. The individuals are on international wanted list, but the situation is like very unlikely to be enforced because it requires Moscow's cooperation regarding those individuals, and to my mind, I would say, which is not very likely.
You know, the situation is completely different today. There are a number of cases when the policymakers or the experts are explaining their dissatisfaction by the number of decisions made by Azerbaijan, for example, cooperation with Ukraine, integration with the European Union, or the, let's say, declaration signed with the United States of America, there is a one side of the story, but absolutely different story when the officials, because one of them, you rightly pointed out, Alexei Chadayev, who was serving as an advisor to Russia's transport minister, and a number of other people are calling for action against the government, then against the diaspora, then the territorial claims, blaming Azerbaijan for a number of issues. So today's situation is completely different, and you rightly also mentioned that Russia is unlikely to extradite its own citizens, while Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova also says that Moscow will protect their legitimate rights and interests. If these suspects remain in Russia, what legal options does Azerbaijan actually hear?
To be honest, Azerbaijan's legal options are very limited because under the Russian constitution, Russian government cannot extradite their own citizens. It's a constitutional limitation on the Russian government, so it's not a policy decision. But what Russia can do is to prosecute those individuals itself. Under the international law, there is a principle of prosecute or extradite. If you are unable to extradite, you should prosecute those individuals. But those principle actually is about more serious crimes, which are international crimes. But some scholars argue that more crimes should be included for that principle. So Azerbaijani government could lobby the Russian government to actually prosecute those individuals, because when the mutual legal assistance request is sent, all the description, all the evidence is attached and sent to the Russian side. So right now, Baku already sent the legal request for international wanted list on possible extradition. I don't know the details because the Russia and Azerbaijan is a state party to the Chisinau Convention, which is a convention regarding the mutual legal assistance on criminal matters. And there is also provision in that international treaty that states may deny extradition if it is their own nationals. So we have a bar on Russian domestic level, the constitution, and the international treaty, which Azerbaijan and Russia is a state party. But that doesn't mean the fact that Russia will not extradite those individuals has no negative outcome for those individuals, because their travel is severely restricted. It is just Russia who is not going to extradite, but if they are going to travel to, let's say, to Kazakhstan, for example, which is under international obligation with the same international treaty, Chisinau Convention, and also it's clear from the news that Interpol channels are used as well. So if they go anywhere in the world, probably they will be detained in the airport, and after trial, they might be extradited to Azerbaijan. And the issue will come regarding whether the crimes are politically motivated or not. If a court decides they are not politically motivated, then the extradition will happen. But if they remain in Russia, they won't be punished unless Russian government decides to so, and it should be based on the evidence. And probably they are punishable under the Russian criminal law, but given it's their own citizens, and that's the remarks regarding the regional foreign policy issue, it's kind of
given the remark of Maria Zakharova, who is saying that Moscow will protect their legitimate rights and interests, it seems quite illogical in this particular case. Now I would like to refer to the declaration which has been signed between Azerbaijan and Russia in 2022, Declaration on Aligned Interaction, that both countries should firmly prevent activities on their territories directed against the sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity of the other. Could a failure to do so raise questions about whether the declaration is being fully implemented?
To be honest, that declaration to me is just a formality, unfortunately, because we have seen negative development of bilateral relations, especially after the incident downing of the civilian aircraft. So this example is another one to show that bilateral declaration is actually, in practice, is not in effect. But we are the strategic partners, but some circles in Moscow are against that kind of partnership, probably because we've seen the rise of Azerbaijan's political influence on the South Caucasus.
Independence policy, I guess.
Yeah, after the removal of the Russian armed forces from the Karabakh as well, we've seen independent Baku. Baku's foreign policy is independent, but either it is United States, the Allied West, or the Russia or China. Baku decides their foreign policy matters based on their national interests, and it's quite clear that some circles in Russia is not happy with that, and it might be maybe not the central government itself, not Mr. Putin, but some politicians who are against it, and they are using some journalists to incite violence against Azerbaijan.
Well, and my final question, if I may, taking all of this together, the hostile rhetoric, Azerbaijan's legal response, and Moscow's official distancing, what does this episode tell us about the current stage of the Azerbaijan-Russia relations?
I would say the current stage is very fragile because after the Azal airplane incident, we've seen the negative bilateral relations, but recently it was static. We've seen positive developments. There was no such incident, but this is another example. At least there was no such incident on public remarks, because it's clear there was deliberations between the Baku and Moscow regarding such remarks in the Russian media space against Azerbaijan, but now it is in public. So that shows that Baku-Moscow relations is very fragile, but also the future of those relations, I believe, will be determined how Moscow is going to react to this legal response by Baku. I don't mean necessarily they need to prosecute those individuals. At least they need to show what measures they are planning to take to prevent the similar remarks to be made by journalists in their media space.
Well, Javid, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us today in our studio. It was indeed a real pleasure to discuss in details all of these issues.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, what is clear is that this dispute goes beyond the statements of three individuals. It raises wider questions about the tone of the debate around Azerbaijan in parts of the Russian media, and about how such rhetoric can affect relations between two neighboring states. Baku has made its position clear. Azerbaijan will defend its sovereignty, security, and national interests, and it will respond when it believes those lines have been crossed. Moscow says these statements do not represent its official position. The question now is whether that distance will be enough to prevent further escalation. That's all for this edition of Inside Politics. Thank you for watching us, and I see you next time.